Second step in the web development process is to determine which hosting solution would best suit the needs of a website, both for the purpose of testing your website during the development process and for live production. A website can either be hosted on your home computer, a traditional hosting service such as shared or dedicated or virtual private hosting, or hosted on a cloud server. So, which type of system would best suit your needs? Well, before we answer this question, there are several factors to consider. Will this site be accessible by the outside world or the public internet, or only available to users within the local network? Will this site be very resource intensive? For example, we would be a small static site with only a few pages and text data, or a dynamic database driven website with a high volume of traffic, perhaps even with large amount of video in high resolution image content. Do you need the hosting platform to be scalable? Meaning, do you expect to start off with a small site that can gradually grow into something much larger? Will this require more resources? Or does your website require different amount of resources at different times? For example, say you run an online business that gets heavy traffic in certain months but barely in other months. What type of programming technologies will this site require? For example, will this be a database driven dynamic website? Or if so, will it require PHP and MySQL or Microsoft based languages such as ASP or ASP.NET? These are very important considerations before making a decision. So, let's start with the first scenario. If you do not intend to make this website publicly accessible, then you will likely be hosting it on a system within your own network. For this to work, you will need to configure this system to work as a server. This is necessary because certain file extensions that we will be working with, such as PHP and MySQL, will not work unless a testing service is created. Keep in mind that you do not need a testing server to view basic HTML pages. If your intention is to build a server and host a website that's accessible within your local network or internet, we will also be demonstrating how to configure a server and routing setting so that other computers within your network can access your server's web directory. Now let's see on the other hand that this is probably the case that you do intend to make your site publicly accessible. Well, as you probably guessed that you could technically use the testing server we will be setting up on your system and open certain ports on your router to allow connections from outside IP address rather than just the local connections. Please note, this is a highly complex and vulnerable to security if not done correctly. Setting up a home computer for public website is beyond the scope of this course. It is also not a very good practice and requires a static IP address which can be quite costly and outweighs any potential benefits. The best option to serve as your hosting solution is either a traditional web hosting package from a reputable company or a cloud hosting service. So, you are probably wondering what the difference is between these two options. When we say traditional web hosting, we are referring to the pre-assembled packages offered by hosting companies such as GoDaddy or HostGator, just to name a couple. These are two examples among many other companies out there. The reason we identify them as traditional is because the latest web hosting solution that most web developers now gravitating towards is cloud hosting. We will get to cloud hosting in a minute. With traditional web hosting, the server that your website is stored on is housed in data centers, typically with hundreds or thousands of other servers. The servers are administered and maintained by the hosting company. This is probably as easy as it gets because you simply need to pay a nominal hosting fee to store your web files and the hosting company takes care of the rest. Hosting companies offer many different packages to suit your needs. Each package will fall under shared hosting, dedicated hosting, or virtual dedicated hosting. With a shared hosting package, your host allocates a certain amount of resource to your website. This illustration shows us what this setup looks like. The server is configured with the Windows operating system. The entire server has a resource capacity of 2 GB of RAM, 512 GB of storage, and 5 TB of monthly bandwidth allocation. With shared hosting, your website would share these system resources with hundreds or even thousands of other websites depending on the server capacity. Each folder in this diagram represents one website. The amount of resources allocated to your website depends on the type of hosting package you register for. Let's take a look at an example of 3 standard hosting packages offered through a commonly used hosting company, GoDaddy. On the GoDaddy.com website, we can see that there are 3 hosting packages available. For $4.49 per month, GoDaddy will allow us to host one website domain with 100 GB of storage, 100 email addresses, and they will provide us with one free domain registration. So let's start with explaining what each of these mean. One website means that this hosting package will allow one domain name to point to a website folder. So for example, www.mywebsite.com will point to the location of our web folder that resides on this particular server. 100 GB of storage simply means the amount of disk space you get on the server for the purpose of storing your files. The larger the website, the more disk space you need. 100 email addresses mean you get 100 customized email aliases that point to your domain. So for example, me at mydomain.com. Bandwidth refers to the amount of file transfer that this hosting package allows. Remember, anytime somebody visits your website, they are essentially downloading all the content and images from the server. So for example, if your homepage is 1 MB and 200 people visit only your homepage in a month, this would translate into a usage of 200 MB of bandwidth per month. You will notice it says unlimited bandwidth for a couple of these, for all of these packages here. Please note this can be a bit misleading. Almost all hosting providers engage in a practice referred to as cloaking for shared hosting accounts. This is done so that your resources do not exceed a certain threshold. This threshold is set based on how much resources the other websites on your server require at any given time. So technically, there is no unlimited resource allocation. As we move towards the right, we can see that the plan gets progressively more expensive but also offers better incentives. One other point worth mentioning is that these are Linux plans, so these servers are hosted on the Linux operating system. There is also an option to see Windows plan. You might be wondering, what's the difference? Well, in this course, we are going to explore PHP and MySQL, which are internet-based languages and database tools. These are very powerful, secure scripting languages that also offers a wide range of support online. They are also best suited for Linux operating systems. So, if you are going to use this programming language in these database tools, PHP and MySQL, Linux would be the best operating system for you to host your website on. Other programming languages such as ASP or ASP.NET and SQL databases are better suited for Windows-based servers. We will be focusing and working on Linux-based servers for this course. Are different than shared hosting in that the entire computing system and all of its resources are only used for a website. As you have probably guessed, this means much more power than the shared hosting packages, but also much more expense. So let's take a look at the Linux plans offered by the same company. These are the dedicated hosting packages offered by GoDaddy.com. We can see that option 1 gives us 4 terabytes of storage, 32 gigabytes of RAM at around $130 per month, substantially more than any of the shared packages. One of the key benefits of dedicated hosting is that you have absolute control over the configuration settings of your server. We will be exploring server configuration in modules to follow. Think of it as your own personal server just stored in a remote location. You can add memory, hard drives and bandwidth as you require. You have complete flexibility on the type of hardware you installed. Please note that because this is a physical computer system, all these upgraded components will need to be installed by your server administrator. With dedicated hosting, you would typically be required to pay an administration fee for the management of your server if you do not do it yourself. This means your hosting company takes care of all required updates, security checks, and any upgrades you need as with shared hosting. As we move towards the right, we see the cost increase, but so do the system resources and specifications. Virtual private hosting, the resources of this system are shared among the few websites. The number of sites sharing the system is significantly less than with shared hosting. You are allocated a much larger portion of the server's operating capacity and bandwidth. The amount depends on the VPS package you purchase. Virtual private servers do not have the same flexibility as dedicated hosting as far as hardware upgrades and configuration. You are generally constrained to the specifications of the system that you initially signed up for. You can increase your share of the resource allocation to an extent. We are not beyond the physical capacity of the hardware on your server. On the GoDaddy.com website, we can see the VPS plans lie somewhere between shared hosting and dedicated hosting in terms of resources. The lowest VPS package starts with 1 GB of RAM, 20 GB of storage. As we move towards the right, they get progressively higher in terms of resource allocation and cost. Cloud hosting has revolutionized the web hosting industry because it offers incredible flexibility at very low cost. Because it's 100% scalable and completely in your control. Similar to traditional hosting, cloud servers are housed in data centers across the globe. To understand how cloud hosting works, we need to understand what the cloud is. Say for example, we have a data center with 2 servers, each with the following specifications: 2 GB of RAM, 512 GB of hard drive storage, and 5 TB of monthly bandwidth allocation. If we were to combine the computing power, storage, and bandwidth of these 2 servers, we have 4 GB of RAM in total, 1024 GB of storage space, and 10 TB of monthly bandwidth. You can think of this total pool of resource as the computing cloud. If we were to add additional servers, CPU, RAM, and storage, it would increase our cloud computing capacity. In this illustration, we now have 9 identical servers, increasing our cloud capacity including CPU, storage, RAM, and bandwidth by a multiple of 9. To understand how cloud hosting differs from traditional hosting, let's first take a look at the downsides of traditional web hosting. With the traditional hosting packages we have explored, you have probably noticed that the packages available were very standardized, meaning you pay a fixed monthly cost and are allocated a certain amount of resource per month, including CPU, storage, and bandwidth of the server. If we used anything less than this allocation, we still pay the same fixed monthly fee. If we went out our usage allowance, we pay a costly overusage fee. Another issue was the jump from the best shared hosting package to a virtual package was quite steep. There was no solution available if you needed more resource than the shared hosting could offer, but not quite as much as virtual hosting solutions. If our website was very resource intensive, we could opt for a dedicated server. As powerful as the dedicated server was, what if we needed even more CPU, RAM, and storage space than the existing hardware configurations offered? We would need to physically keep adding and upgrading physical hardware components. To make it more challenging, the server would be stored in a data center, so an on-site technician would be required to do the work. This could increase significant cost, and even more importantly, your website would be down for a period of time unless a backup server was created. Cloud hosting provides an efficient solution to all these issues. The key difference is the way in which resources from a cloud computing network can be utilized versus traditional hosting. Cloud servers allow users to create virtual machines and extract as much resources from the cloud they needed. The cloud itself can be infinitely scaled to meet the needs of the application's host. This means you can tap into the cloud and create a virtual server that best suits the needs and resource requirements of your website or application. Rather than being hosted on a single instance of a physical server, as with traditional hosting, the website is hosted on a virtual partition which draws its system resource from an extensive network of underlying physical servers. If you find this a little bit confusing, think of it as installing a tap to a large water supply. When you need more water, you open the valve and increase the flow. If you need less, you do the opposite. The tap can be turned on and off anytime. In this comparison, the water supply is the cloud. The tap controls the flow of water, or in our case, system resources such as CPU, RAM, storage, and bandwidth. Cloud hosting features utility style costing, meaning you only pay for what you use. So let's take a look at an example to better illustrate the concept of cloud hosting. You want to start a membership-based online movie streaming service like Netflix and market it to US-based consumers. Since your site is new and you are not expecting too many subscribers or visitors to begin with, so you need to keep hosting costs at a minimum. Over time, you plan on bringing in investors and launching a marketing campaign for your service. You expect your service to grow exponentially and require a hosting solution that can best accommodate your goals. Let's compare the life cycle of this business relative to the traditional hosting services versus cloud hosting. With traditional hosting, you would likely be first registered for a shared hosting account, perhaps the most basic package to begin with. So, you would have to set up your entire web application on this package. Setting up includes uploading files, testing your application, and configuring your database and email service. Throughout the first year of your streaming business, you see gradual increase in traffic and periodically upgrade your shared hosting account to the best shared plan available. This is relatively easy. There is no extra setup, just a simple upgrade and you are still on the same server. In year 2, you start noticing your web pages frequently down and your hosting company provides you with a notice indicating that your website uses too much resources for the shared hosting package. This means you have no choice but to upgrade. Moving up the ladder, you start looking at VPS hosting solutions. The cheapest you find is for $40 per month. You realize the package would be way more than you need at this time, but there really isn't any alternative. You commit to a 1-year subscription plan for the basic VPS package. Since you have now moved to a VPS server from a shared hosting account, you will need to set up everything again. This means uploading, testing, and database and email configurations all over again. At very minimum, You would experience 1 day or 2 days of downtime till your domain name resolves to your new server. In year 3, you notice a substantial decrease in traffic because a competitor recently launched a new streaming service. Your website barely gets any traffic, but you really don't want to go through the headache of downgrading back to the shared hosting package. You plan on coming out with new features that will likely win your visitors back. Since you don't want to downgrade, you stay on your existing plan and continue to pay $40 a month for the remainder of the year. Even though your resource requirements would probably have needed only a $7 a month shared hosting plan. In year 4, you introduced many exciting new features to your website and your customers quickly take notice. You see a huge spike in traffic and none of the VPS packages are able to keep up with your resource requirements. To make matters worse, your hosting company keeps hitting you with costly overusage fees. So you decide to switch to a dedicated server. Moving from a VPS to a dedicated server, you go through this setup all over again. This will be the third time that you have had to go through this. Also, since you are changing servers, again you can expect another downtime of at least 1 to 2 days because your domain name resolves to this new server. In year 5, your application continues to grow and outstrips the pre-assembled dedicated solution offered by a web host. Now, your web hosting provider will need to start upgrading and adding physical components to your server to accommodate the new resources requirements. You start to notice your server administration bills and monthly fees really adding up. You also realize that after this setup, downgrading to a lower VPS solution in slow months would be very impractical. Essentially, you are stuck and committed to paying for this dedicated server regardless of how much or how little system resources you actually use. Now let's take a look at what would have happened if you had initially registered for cloud hosting rather than traditional web hosting. Step 1. You would create a cloud hosting account with the provider of your choice and create a virtual server. You would configure your server so that it suits the level of traffic you expect to receive, which at this point isn't much. Let's look at some basic plans offered by popular cloud hosting providers. Here we can see for $20 a month, we get double the performance in every aspect than we did with the GoDaddy virtual private server solution within the same price range. Furthermore, these packages also offer per hour billing. That means if you turn your server off, there are no monthly or annual subscription fees. You only pay for what you use. We use this particular website, linode.com, because their pricing packages are fairly simple to understand with your server setup with cloud hosting. You are now in a position to scale your infrastructure up and down as your website application needs. So remember, in year 2, when we had a spike in traffic, all we need to do is tap into the cloud and upgrade our virtual machine. We can add a hard drive, RAM, and more bandwidth, all at a click of a button. Now, what about year 3? When we had a large drop in traffic, well, you can downsize your server just as easily as you upgraded it with a click of a few buttons. We can now remove CPU, hard disk, memory, and bandwidth capacity. We could go on, but now you probably see that due to its flexibility, scalability, and cost efficiency and reliability, cloud hosting has gained considerable notoriety as a great hosting solution for websites and applications of all sizes and complexity. From small static websites with only a few pages to a large-scale dynamic web application.